I used to think betrayal came with warning signs, shifty eyes, uncomfortable silences, or some kind of coldness you could sense if you paid close enough attention. But when my world fell apart, it didn't come with flashing lights or dramatic music. It came quietly, wrapped in soft smiles and everyday routines, from the very people I thought were my family. My stepmother, Clarissa, had married my dad when I was 11. At the beginning, she acted like the kind of woman who stepped out of a family magazine. Soft voice, perfect hair, always smiling. My brother, Ryan, was a year older than me and her biological son. When they first moved in, he wasn't cruel, he wasn't warm either, but that was understandable. We were both kids forced into a rough new reality. If anything, we tolerated each other. But things changed when my father got sick. His slow decline opened a door for Clarissa, one she walked through with frightening ease. Dad had always handled the finances, but as he got weaker, he trusted Clarissa to help out. I was 18 at the time, working part-time, saving money for college, scraping together every tip from my job at the diner. Dad insisted I keep all my savings in a joint account with him just in case something happens. You'll always have access. He trusted people too much. The morning after Dad passed, the world felt like it had lost all color. I remember sitting in the kitchen, staring at a cup of coffee I hadn't touched. Clarissa walked in, makeup perfectly done despite the circumstances, as though grief was just another accessory she chose to wear. "We'll get through this," she told me, her voice too calm to rehearse. Ryan leaned against the counter behind her, arms crossed, eyes avoiding mine. I thought they were grieving in their own way. I didn't realize they were planning. 3 days after the funeral, I went to withdraw money to cover tuition payments I was due to send. When the ATM printed the slip, I stared at the balance, blinking, telling myself the machine must be broken. $0. I tried again. Same result. A hollow feeling opened in my chest, spreading like ice through my veins. I called the bank, still convincing myself it was an error. It wasn't. The account had been emptied legally. My father's share had transferred to his spouse upon his death, and Clarissa, as the joint owner, had full access. She had swept every last cent, including my wages, my savings, everything I had earned, into her personal account. I went home shaking with anger and confusion. Clarissa was in the living room, a glass of wine in hand. Ryan sat beside her, scrolling through his phone. They looked comfortable, too comfortable. "What did you do with my money?" I demanded, the words ripping out of me. Clarissa didn't even pretend to look surprised. "Honey," she said, sighing as if I were being unreasonable, "it wasn't your money. Not legally. You're an adult now, and you need to learn responsibility. I'll hold on to it until you prove you're ready." "I need it for college," I shouted, tears pricking at my eyes. "Dad wanted your father isn't here anymore," she snapped, the mask slipping for the first time. "And I'm not paying for you to run off to some school I've never even approved of." Ryan smirked slightly, just enough for me to see it. "Don't worry," he said, "Mom will make sure it gets used for something worthwhile." Worthwhile, meaning him, his hobbies, his college fund, his life. I felt sick. "You can't do this," I whispered, looking between them. "Dad trusted you." "Your father trusted me because I make smart decisions," Clarissa replied. You've always been impulsive, emotional. You're not ready to handle money." I clenched my fists so tightly my nails dug into my palms. That money was mine. She stood up, placing her wine glass down with a soft clink. "If you're going to live under my roof, you will follow my rules. That includes finances. If you don't like that, then you can leave." It was January. I had no money, no relatives nearby, and nowhere to go. They knew that, they counted on it, but I refused to stay. I packed the few things I could carry: clothes, a few keepsakes from Dad, and walked out into the cold night, tears freezing on my cheeks. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I couldn't stay. I stayed with a friend for a few weeks, working double shifts, trying to rebuild from zero, telling myself I would figure everything out somehow. But life doesn't bend to desperation, and despite my efforts, I couldn't afford tuition. My spot at the college slipped away. My dreams went with it. For a long time, I blamed myself. But one night, when I was lying awake in a cramped apartment I could barely afford, I made myself a promise. One day, I would come back, and when I did, they would regret everything. Survival has a way of reshaping a person. It strips away what you thought you knew about yourself. Before my father died, I always believed I was someone who needed certainty, a plan, a safety net, a place to come home to. But once Clarissa and Ryan took everything from me, All I had left was the stubborn determination not to let their betrayal be the end of my story. The first months were the hardest. I stayed on my friend Megan's couch for nearly 6 weeks. She worked nights at the same diner I did. And her little apartment above the laundromat smelled like detergent and the faint hint of cigarette smoke from the traffic outside. But to me, it was safety. It was the first time in months I could sleep without feeling watched or judged. I worked double shifts. Whenever someone called out, I couldn't afford to be picky. I flipped burgers, scrubbed grease off pans, wiped down booths at midnight, and smiled at customers even when my face felt frozen from exhaustion. Every dollar mattered. My hands were constantly cracked and red from the harsh soaps. My back ached. My feet throbbed. But slowly, painfully slowly, the numbers in my new savings account began to grow. Still, no matter how hard I worked, I wasn't earning enough for school. Tuition was a mountain, and I was climbing it with bare hands. You could take a year off, Megan suggested one night as we sat on the fire escape, sharing a bag of chips. Figure things out first. Plenty of people do. I stared at the cars rushing by below. If I take a year off, I may never go back. Then find another way, she said. You always do. Her confidence in me was something I wasn't used to. It felt undeserved, but it planted a seed. I started researching scholarships, programs, anything that might help. That's when I found it. A paid apprenticeship program in IT support through a local nonprofit. Applicants needed to pass an entrance test and commit to 2 years of training. Afterward, they'd help place graduates into tech companies. Tech wasn't something I had considered before, but I wasn't in a place to be picky with my future. I studied every night after work, sometimes until dawn, propping my eyelids open with caffeine and determination. I borrowed books, watched tutorials on Megan's old laptop, and practiced coding basics until it started to make sense. Little by little, the overwhelm faded. The day of the entrance test, I was shaking so badly I dropped my pencil twice, but when the results came back, the director called me personally. You scored exceptionally, she said. We'd love to have you join the program. I nearly cried. For the first time in months, I felt like the world wasn't collapsing beneath me. Training wasn't easy. Between the program and the diner, I barely had time to breathe. 16-hour days became normal, but I found myself enjoying the challenge. The problem solving, the logic, the way each skill I learned opened a new door. I wasn't just rebuilding, I was reinventing. Look at you, Megan said one night as she handed me a bowl of instant noodles. You're like a machine. I laughed. Machines don't cry in the bathroom when they can't solve a coding bug. You're allowed to cry. You're not allowed to give up. By the second year of the apprenticeship, I was earning enough from my internship to finally move out of her apartment. My new place was tiny, a studio with peeling paint and one stubborn window, but it was mine. For the first time, I locked a door and knew nobody could take anything from me. I didn't talk to Clarissa or Ryan. Not after the night I left. But they reached out at first. It was subtle, a short message from Ryan on social media. Hope you're doing okay. I ignored it. Then Clarissa emailed me on my birthday. Let's put the past behind us. Family is important. Family. She had the nerve to use that word. I didn't respond. Later, Ryan tried again. Mom says, you're being dramatic. You know she was only trying to teach you responsibility. Responsibility. That word made my stomach twist with fury. I blocked them both. The more I grew, the more they tried to find ways back into my life. And the more I realized why. They expected me to fail. They expected me to come crawling back. They expected the girl they kicked out with nothing to stay nothing. But I was no longer that girl. I was stronger, smarter, more capable than they ever believed, and I wasn't done at the end of my apprenticeship. I landed a job at a rising tech firm downtown. The pay was higher than anything I'd ever imagined. Benefits, bonuses, things I had once assumed belonged to other people. When I signed the contract, I felt a shift, a turning point. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was ascending. And someday, I knew I'd cross paths with them again. Not as the girl they stole from, but as the person their betrayal created. Years passed, and life started to feel like it was moving on its own rhythm, a rhythm I controlled. I had a steady career in tech, a modest but comfortable apartment, and friends who had become like family. The scars from Clarissa and Ryan's betrayal were still there, but they no longer ached the way they used to. Pain had turned into fuel, shaping a version of me I didn't recognize when I looked in the mirror 5 years ago. I had learned to be cautious, observant, and above all, strategic. It wasn't enough to just succeed. I wanted them to see my success. Not in some petty "I'm richer than you now" way, but in a way that would make them confront the consequences of their actions. I wanted the shock, the undeniable realization that they had underestimated me in every possible way. It started subtly. I followed them online, just to see where they were. Ryan had finished college, majoring in business, and had taken a job in his father's old firm, an opportunity Clarissa had fought hard to control after Dad passed. She was the queen of appearances, hosting charity events, posting lavish dinners, smiling in photos that suggested a life free from the struggles she had inflicted on me. I remember scrolling through one of her social media posts and feeling a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Anger, yes, but also a strange clarity. I realized then that their sense of security had always been built on my absence. They had thrived while I was scraping together pennies, and now, the tables could turn. I didn't jump in blindly. I had learned from them. Haste was dangerous. Instead, I began quietly building a plan. I started with knowledge. I researched their finances, their businesses, their habits. Clarissa's investments were amateurish at best. She trusted flashy advisors without understanding a thing. Ryan was ambitious but reckless, prone to overconfidence that would eventually betray him. Both had weaknesses that could be leveraged. I kept my progress to myself. No one at work knew my past. My friends assumed I had a conventional family. That was perfect. Their ignorance was my advantage. The first small step toward my revenge came during a holiday gala. By chance, or perhaps fate, I was invited as part of my company's sponsorship of the event Clarissa loved to host. She didn't recognize me at first. I had changed a lot in the years since I left. My hair was shorter, my style sharper, my posture unshakable. But the moment our eyes met across the room, I saw it. Recognition. And then, quickly, a flicker of doubt, a subtle tightening around her mouth. Ryan was less subtle. He froze, just for a second, then forced a smile. I could feel the tension radiating off him. Neither of them expected to see me there. The evening became a chessboard, each move carefully considered. I smiled, nodded politely, and let them underestimate me entirely. By the time the event ended, they had no idea who I really was or the extent of my accomplishments. I had to keep it that way. Let them grow comfortable. Let them underestimate the fire I had stoked quietly over the years. Over the next few months, I began placing small, calculated interventions in their lives. A tip to a client that led Clarissa to make a costly investment mistake. A suggestion to a supplier Ryan relied on that backfired. Tiny things that seemed coincidental but weren't. Every time I heard of a stumble, or saw the ripple effects, I allowed myself a private smile. I didn't want humiliation, at least, not yet. I wanted the inevitability of their realization to be sharp, unmistakable, and complete. The greatest thrill, however, was knowing that they never suspected me. Clarissa's confidence was beginning to waver, just imperceptibly, just enough that she'd double-check her decisions. Ryan started second-guessing minor choices he would have normally taken for granted. Both were slowly, subtly, tasting the frustration they had caused me years ago. It was during this period that I realized the most powerful tool in my arsenal wasn't money, or even revenge, it was time. Patience had become my weapon. The years of struggle, the nights of studying, the months of planning, they were all investments that were about to pay off. I allowed myself one quiet moment of reflection before stepping fully into the next phase of my plan. Sitting in my apartment, looking at the skyline through the floor-to-ceiling window, I felt the weight of the past finally shift. The anger that had driven me was no longer sharp and consuming. It was calm, precise, a quiet force moving toward its target. I knew what I had to do next. Make my presence known in a way they could not ignore. Not in a vague sense, not through hints, but with undeniable impact. They needed to see me, the consequences of their betrayal, all at once, and I would wait for the perfect moment. The twist they never saw coming was close. The moment I had been building toward arrived sooner than I expected, though not in a way I could have planned. Life has a way of setting the stage for dramatic entrances, often when we least expect it. It started with a phone call. My company had been hired for a major corporate merger, an event that would bring our firm, and me personally, into direct contact with Clarissa's business empire. I felt a thrill of anticipation as I reviewed the documents and prepared my strategy. The merger was high stakes, high visibility, and exactly the arena I needed to reveal myself. When I first walked into the boardroom, I saw her immediately. Clarissa, immaculate as ever, seated at the head of the table, her posture perfectly poised. Ryan sat beside her, pretending to focus on the papers in front of him but occasionally glancing my way. They hadn't anticipated me here, not in this context. Not in this role. Good morning, I said, my voice steady and controlled as I greeted the room. Their heads turned, a flicker of recognition in her eyes, quickly replaced by a polite, almost dismissive smile. Ryan's jaw tightened imperceptibly. I spent the first hour presenting strategies, showcasing my expertise, my insight, my undeniable value. Every point I made, every graph and analysis I shared, underlined something they had overlooked all those years. I wasn't the naive, powerless girl they had dismissed. I was capable, intelligent, and completely unshakable. As the meeting progressed, I noticed the subtle shifts. Clarissa's hands, which had been casually folded at the beginning, now fidgeted with her pen. Ryan's confident posture slumped slightly. Their faces betrayed the beginnings of panic, though neither of them dared show it fully. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. I've reviewed the prior investments, I said, my tone neutral, almost conversational. Some of them carry risks that weren't fully accounted for. If we proceed without addressing these, the company could face significant losses. I watched Clarissa's expression tighten. She was forced to pay attention to me now, not as a guest, not as someone to dismiss but as the expert in the room. Every point I raised was valid, precise, and undeniable. I wasn't here to humiliate them. Yet, I was here to make them see. Ryan finally spoke, his voice faltering slightly. We've been managing fine, haven't we? I smiled faintly. Until now, perhaps. But these are exactly the kinds of oversights that could have sunk the company years ago, oversights that a certain lack of foresight might explain. Clarissa's eyes narrowed. She tried to regain control, but every move I made, every carefully calculated observation, chipped away at her authority. By the end of the meeting, I had subtly corrected mistakes that could have cost them millions. They were forced to acknowledge my competence in real time, their pride crumbling quietly as I spoke. Afterward, in the hallway, Ryan approached me, attempting a casual tone that failed miserably. Looks like you've done well for yourself? I kept my smile polite but distant. Years of hard work, Ryan. Something you might consider next time you make assumptions about someone's abilities. Clarissa was quieter. Her gaze lingered on me, a mixture of admiration, disbelief, and just beneath the surface fear. She had underestimated me completely. Every decision she had made at my expense now hung between us like a shadow. She couldn't escape. But this was just the beginning. My true plan was far more elaborate than mere professional triumph. I had positioned myself strategically, gathering influence, knowledge, and connections that would allow me to reveal their misdeeds to the public and to themselves, in a way they could not deny or deflect. The twist they never saw coming wasn't just my success. It was the revelation that their entire perception of power, control, and security had been an illusion. While they had lived in comfort and assumed dominance, I had been building leverage, intelligence, and an unshakable foundation beneath their feet. A week later, I received the first opportunity to turn my strategy into action. A financial audit, initiated by our firm but unbeknownst to them, revealed mismanaged funds and decisions that could jeopardize Clarissa's standing with shareholders. I provided the analysis, subtly guiding the process to ensure that the truth would be undeniable. The moment it went public, the shock was immediate. Clarissa's empire, once untouchable, now faced scrutiny. Ryan's career, built on her guidance and trust, began to wobble under the weight of exposure. I had not only succeeded professionally, I had disrupted the very foundation of their world without lifting a finger in overt confrontation. And yet, in private, the most satisfying moment came later that evening. I received a text from Ryan, brief and terse. We underestimated you. Completely. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. He knew, Clarissa knew. The message was clear. I had changed everything. For the first time, I allowed myself a quiet smile. Revenge, carefully planned and executed, had its own quiet power. And though the process wasn't finished, I finally understood something vital. The most effective revenge doesn't scream, it shows, it teaches, it lingers. I had shocked them, and they would never forget it. The days that followed were surreal, watching Clarissa and Ryan scramble, their carefully curated lives beginning to unravel, was a feeling I could never have imagined back when I had nothing. And yet, I didn't relish cruelty. This wasn't about petty satisfaction. It was about truth, about showing them the consequences of their choices. Every move they had made against me years ago had ripple effects, and now, for the first time, they were forced to face those ripples. The media coverage was relentless. Industry blogs dissected the mismanaged investments. Financial news channels highlighted errors in corporate strategy, scrutinizing every decision Clarissa had made since inheriting my father's influence. Her public persona, once untouchable, began to fracture. She had always been a master of appearances. But appearances alone could not withstand this storm. Ryan, meanwhile, had to defend his professional reputation. Every conference call, every email, every board meeting reminded him of one undeniable truth. His success had been built on shaky ground. I could see him on social media interviews and online news clips, trying to maintain confidence, yet slipping, faltering, exposing cracks in his armor that had once seemed impervious. I observed from a distance, careful not to interfere overtly. Every step I had taken until now had been precise, methodical. I didn't need to engage directly. The system I had quietly manipulated was now exposing the truth for me. My satisfaction was silent, simmering, yet immense. Then came the private confrontation I had anticipated all along. I received an unexpected invitation to a charity gala. One Clarissa insisted I attend. Her tone was polite, almost overly cordial, but I sensed desperation beneath it. She wanted to appear magnanimous, to show that whatever was happening in her professional world didn't touch her family. She hadn't yet realized that I had already shifted the balance of power. I arrived at the gala wearing a simple, elegant dress. I didn't need extravagance. Confidence and presence spoke louder than any designer label. As I walked in, I felt their eyes on me. Ryan's jaw tightened almost immediately, while Clarissa's expression oscillated between forced composure and barely contained panic. "There you are," she said, her voice steady but with an edge of tension I could feel. "It's good to see you." I smiled faintly. Likewise. The conversation began with superficial pleasantries. I complimented the venue, commented on the event's success. Then, subtly, I guided the discussion toward business. I listened to Clarissa speak, pointing out risks she had overlooked, gently suggesting alternatives. Her composure cracked not outwardly, but in the way her voice wavered, in the subtle hesitation that betrayed her certainty. Ryan tried to interrupt, to assert authority, but I let him flounder. Every word I spoke chipped away at the illusion of control they had maintained for years. By the end of the evening, I had them exactly where I wanted. They were forced to acknowledge my intelligence, my competence, my presence. Their faces, pale under the soft glow of chandeliers, reflected the truth. They had underestimated me. They had assumed I would remain powerless, unnoticed, silent. But I had not only survived, I had flourished. The next day, I learned that shareholders had begun questioning Clarissa's leadership. Calls poured in. Emails. Internal investigations were quietly launched. Ryan's superiors began scrutinizing his decisions. Every moment, every misstep, every poorly calculated risk from the past came to light. All traced back to their earlier choices, the very arrogance that had allowed them to steal from me. And yet, despite all this, I didn't gloat publicly. I maintained silence. No one could accuse me of vindictiveness. I had let facts and competence speak for themselves. The satisfaction was private. A quiet victory that lingered in their minds long after I had left the room. Weeks passed, and I continued to observe from the sidelines. Clarissa attempted damage control, but the cracks were too deep. Ryan struggled to maintain credibility, his confidence undermined by the lingering knowledge that I had outmaneuvered him. Every attempt to reassert authority fell flat. The balance of power had shifted irrevocably, and the realization of it was devastating for them. It was in one final fleeting moment that the reality hit them fully. At a networking event, Clarissa's closest allies began to question her judgment openly. Ryan was confronted by his peers about decisions he had previously been praised for, and I, quietly confident, stood in the corner, observing the culmination of years of patience and precision. This was the moment I had envisioned on nights spent in a tiny apartment, scraping together pennies while planning my future. The moment where they would see me not as a child, not as an obstacle, but as the force their betrayal had inadvertently created. And they did. The expressions on their faces were priceless, a combination of shock, recognition, and regret. Clarissa's composure finally gave way to panic. Ryan's confidence dissolved into helplessness. They had assumed they were untouchable. They had assumed that time had erased my presence. But time had only sharpened me. And in that silence, in that shared recognition, I felt an immense sense of closure. Not vengeance, not hatred. Closure. I had been wronged. I had suffered, and I had persevered. They had underestimated me, and now, they had learned their lesson. After the fallout, the dust began to settle. Clarissa's empire was still standing, but the aura of invincibility had vanished. Ryan's career had been shaken, though not completely destroyed, and both of them had been forced to confront what their actions had cost, not just financially, but morally. I didn't seek revenge for revenge's sake. My goal had always been clarity, justice, and reclaiming my life. Watching them grapple with the consequences was not about humiliation, it was about truth. And now, finally, the truth had surfaced. The most striking moment came months later. I ran into Clarissa at a professional conference. The atmosphere was polite, formal, but this time, I sensed no pretense. She looked at me directly, her eyes no longer full of superiority, no longer dismissive. There was a subtle shift of recognition, perhaps, of respect born out of defeat and understanding. "You've done remarkable things," she said, almost quietly, avoiding her usual flair for dramatics. "I underestimated you." I nodded, allowing a faint smile. "We all make mistakes, Clarissa. Some are harder to fix than others." She didn't respond, only looked away. I knew the weight of that acknowledgement was heavier than any argument or confrontation. That was all the closure I needed. Ryan approached later, trying a lighter tone. "I guess we really didn't see it coming, huh?" "You didn't," I replied simply. No malice. No need for long explanations. He nodded, swallowing the remnants of his ego. The roles had reversed. Not violently. Not dramatically. Just inevitably. The world had quietly realigned itself. In the months that followed, I continued building my career, expanding my skills, and taking on projects that challenged me. The sense of empowerment I had gained through years of struggle became a guiding principle. Resilience, patience, and strategic thinking were more valuable than any inherited advantage. I also reconnected with friends and mentors who had supported me through my lowest points. They celebrated my success without judgment. Understanding the depth of the journey I had endured, I realized something vital through it all. The theft of my money and trust by Clarissa and Ryan had been a catalyst. It forced me to build myself from nothing, to cultivate skills, patience, and resilience that I might never have developed otherwise. What had initially felt like the end of my life was, in fact, the beginning of an entirely new chapter, Chapter 1 authored with precision and intention. One evening, I reflected on the path I had walked. The girl who had left home years ago, penniless and betrayed, would hardly recognize me now. I had transformed, not through luck or inheritance, but through deliberate, consistent effort and unwavering belief in my own capabilities. That realization brought a profound sense of peace. Clarissa and Ryan never reached out again, and I made no attempts to contact them. Our paths had crossed just enough to shift the balance, to make the lesson undeniable. Their silence spoke volumes, and for the first time in years, I could finally let go of the lingering resentment that had fueled me. Life moved forward. I took on new challenges, traveled, invested in experiences I had once thought impossible, and even mentored others who had faced betrayal or hardship. I discovered that helping others rebuild their lives brought more satisfaction than seeing anyone fall. My own strength became a beacon, a reminder that resilience and intelligence can outlast deception and greed. Looking back, I saw the irony in the situation. The people who had tried to take everything from me had inadvertently equipped me with the drive, skills, and insight to surpass them entirely. They had underestimated the most important thing, me. They had believed that money and control defined power. I learned that true power lies in endurance, knowledge, and the ability to transform pain into purpose. Years later, I would occasionally hear of Clarissa and Ryan through mutual acquaintances or public reports. Clarissa continued to rebuild her business, cautious now, humbled by the lessons she had learned. Ryan recalibrated his ambitions, carrying a new respect for strategy and foresight. I didn't feel satisfaction in their struggles anymore. I felt serenity in my own achievements. I had achieved what I had set out to do, not just to reclaim what was taken, but to emerge as someone they could never have anticipated, a person, unbreakable, capable, and self-made. The shock I had delivered was complete, not through malice, but through life itself. And in that quiet, enduring victory, I finally felt free. Free from resentment, free from the shadow of betrayal, and free to live a life defined entirely on my own terms. The lesson lingered, a subtle but powerful truth. Sometimes, the people who hurt you most provide the impetus to become the person you were always meant to be. I had turned betrayal into triumph, loss into strategy, and pain into empowerment. And that, more than anything, was the twist they never saw coming.